They were married under the trees. Not with bells or books or witnesses in suits, but in the Apache way. Two people standing before the wind, hands pressed together. No vows, just truth. She gave him a piece of her hair, braided tight. He gave her his mother's turquoise ring, too large for her finger, but warm from his chest. She wore it on a leather string around her neck. When the ceremony was over, the women sang. The children danced in a circle around them. And Tav, for the first time since she'd met him, laughed out loud. A deep, rattling sound like thunder rolling over dry land. Maren laughed too, not because she understood the words, but because she felt like a root finally touching water. Life was not easy. The winter came hard that year. Food grew thin. Blankets froze stiff in the morning. But Tav always made sure she ate. He gave her the last bit of meat from his own bowl, wrapped her feet in his own fur-lined coat when hers cracked and tore. He slept closer then, not for warmth but for safety. His arm always rested lightly over her ribs, never gripping, as if to say, "You are not alone now, even if the wolves come." One night, there was a noise in the dark. Gunfire. She jolted up. Tav was already standing, knife in hand, face calm as ice. A boy had wandered back wounded from a nearby scouting trip. Whites had crossed the territory line. Drunk, armed, laughing. They'd taken 2 horses and shot at a cooking fire. No one died, but the village was restless. Angry, scared. Tav didn't speak much that night. He just carved. A long piece of juniper. Smooth, slow strokes. When she asked what it was for, he said softly, "For waiting." Waiting for what? He didn't say. That night, she sat by the fire and stared at her hands. They were rough now, darkened by sun and labor, calloused in places she didn't recognize. But they were strong. They didn't tremble anymore. She remembered how her father used to say, "You'll never be a bride, not with that face." She pressed her fingers to her cheek now and whispered, "This face was kissed by a good man." The trouble didn't go away. 3 days later, a small settler posse rode into the woods near the ridge. They didn't enter the village, but their prints were found by scouts. Men in wool jackets, armed. She overheard whispers around the fire. "They're looking for a girl. White girl. Tall. Strange teeth." Her heart stopped. She was the burden they'd given away, and now they wanted her back. Tav didn't flinch. He packed a small satchel, told her they were riding, not running, protecting. He didn't say what would happen if the men found her. He just looked her in the eye and said, "They will not touch what is not theirs." She rode behind him on the horse, arms around his waist. Every hoofbeat was a prayer. Every bend in the trail could have been a bullet. But the mountains swallowed them, and no one followed. They lived in a canyon for 2 weeks. Just them. No village. No drums. Just firelight and silence. She asked him one evening, "Do you think I'm ugly?" He didn't answer at first. Just looked at her long and deep. Then said, "You ask like it matters." Her lips trembled. "Because it always has," she whispered. He leaned forward, took her face in his hands, held it like something sacred, then said slowly, "Do you know what my mother told me? A pretty woman burns out a man's fire with worry, but a woman with truth in her bones? She keeps the whole lodge warm." Then he added, with a soft grin, "And you are blazing." She kissed him first that night. When they returned to the village, no one asked questions. They were welcomed with food and fire and laughter. Life resumed. Children called her Maren now without fear. Old women taught her how to dye cloth with wildflowers. She learned to speak in short Apache phrases, halting but real. And when she braided her hair, she didn't do it to hide her face. She did it because Tav liked how it looked behind her ear. One day, word came that her father was dead, shot in a card game over a stolen bottle. The man who once spat at her feet, traded her off like livestock, left the world with no one by his side. No marker, no name spoken kindly. She said nothing for a while, but that night she walked out to the field behind the village. Kneeling down, She scooped some dirt in her hands and let it fall through her fingers. Then she whispered, "You lost the only thing that could have loved you back." Tav found her there later, her eyes wet. He said nothing, just sat beside her until morning. Time passed. The village grew. A new child was born. Tav built a new smokehouse. Marin carved tiny beads from bone and painted them red. She had a place, not because someone gave it to her, but because she made it. She earned it. She became it. And every night when she lay down, Tav curled behind her, his hand across her waist, his breath on her shoulder, a reminder that someone had seen her face and called it home. They built a home, not a grand one, just a lodge stitched with hides, pine poles, and thick layers of bark. But every piece of it was placed with care. Tav carved animals into the doorway post. A bear, a lizard, and a small bird with wings spread wide. "For luck," he said. Marin made a curtain from strips of blue cloth someone had left behind in the trader's bundle. It fluttered in the breeze like water. Inside, there was space for two people to live without apology. That alone made it beautiful. Some nights she couldn't sleep. The wind would howl, or a child would cry in a nearby tent, and Marin's mind would stir. What if her father had sold her to someone worse? What if those men had found her in the canyon? What if she'd never climbed onto Tav's horse? She'd roll over then, and he'd already be watching her. Not with fear, just quiet, steady calm. "You're here," he'd say, and somehow that was always enough. Spring came with gifts, warm rains, a field full of orange wildflowers, and one morning something more. Marin threw up behind the lodge. Twice. She told Tav it was something she ate. He didn't say anything, but later that day, he returned from the woods with a small bunch of yarrow flowers and dried roots in a pouch. The old healer woman took one look at Marin's belly and smiled. "Moons come late for a reason," she said. Marin sat very still. Her hands didn't know what to do. Fold? Shake? Cover her stomach? When she told Tav, he just exhaled like the weight of the earth had finally been lifted. And then he whispered, "Then we build a third mat." The women took her in gently. She was no longer just a wife, no longer just the pale outsider with strange words. She was mother now. That changed things. They showed her which roots to chew to ease the sickness, which songs to hum to keep fear away. And when she asked, "What if the child doesn't look like me?" they only laughed. "He won't look like either of you," one old woman said, brushing Marin's cheek. "He'll look like himself, and we will love him for it." Tav carved a rattle from cottonwood. Marin stitched a blanket from squirrel hides and worn cloth scraps. They spoke of names, of which ones meant sky and which ones meant fire. Tav wanted to wait, said a name shouldn't come until the child had spoken with the stars. But Marin whispered one name into the wind when no one was listening. Leo. It had no meaning in Apache. It was just something soft she remembered from a dream. The birth was long, the pain sharp and merciless. Tav held her hands the entire time, his forehead pressed against hers. She bit down on a cloth to keep from screaming. And when the baby finally came, silent at first, slippery and red and so small it seemed impossible, Marin thought she might break in two. Then it cried. A short, sharp sound. Not loud, but alive. The healer placed the child in her arms. A boy, with Tav's eyes, and her crooked second toe. She laughed and cried at once, then looked at Tav, who hadn't blinked. "Leo," she whispered again. He smiled. "That's a good name." Word spread fast. The white woman had birthed a strong boy. The men nodded at Tav now with something more than respect. And the children gathered around their home, offering carved toys and pebbles shaped like hearts. No one asked what Marin had looked like before. No one asked if she had been given or traded or stolen. All they saw was what she had become. Mother, wife, woman with fire in her chest and a child at her side. Sometimes, when she bathed in the river, she'd look at her reflection. She still wasn't beautiful. Not in the way her father once believed beauty mattered. Her nose was still uneven. Her lips cracked in the dry wind. Her back still bore faint marks from years of bending and working. But her eyes were soft now, her face steady, and her smile, when she let it bloom, was honest. That was more than beauty. That was freedom. Leo grew fast. By winter, he was crawling into every pouch and basket. By spring, he was walking, arms spread like wings, hair full of dirt. He called Tav Ba and Marin Na. Sometimes, she watched him sleep, one hand curled in a fist, the other resting near his face. She'd stroke his tiny fingers and think, "This boy is everything they said I couldn't be. Loved, kept, chosen." That night, as she lay beside Tav with Leo sleeping between them, she whispered, "Do you think my father would have changed his mind if he saw all this?" Tav was silent for a long while. Then he said, "Your father could not see beyond himself. That is not your burden to carry." She nodded. And then, very softly, he added, "But I see you. Always have." There was a season the rain didn't come. Dust gathered in the corners of the lodge. The riverbed cracked like old skin. The deer moved higher into the hills, and even the wolves howled less often. People grew quiet and hungry. Marin did what she could. She made thinner stews, stretched roots with bark shavings, chewed dried acorns until they were soft enough for Leo to eat. Tav hunted from dawn to dusk. He brought back squirrels, a lean turkey, once even a snake, and they were grateful for every bite. But it wasn't enough for a tribe this size. One morning, the chief summoned Tav, and Marin saw it coming before he even turned back. "They want me to leave," he said softly. "Scout farther. Maybe to the edge of the mountain." "For how long?" He didn't answer. That meant too long. He left at dawn 2 days later. Marin packed smoked meat into his pouch, braided 2 cords for his boots, and tied a tiny carved rattle into his bag. A charm for luck. Leo waved as he rode off. Marin didn't. She stood still, but her hand clutched the hem of her dress so tight her knuckles paled. The days grew long. Leo grew restless. He asked for his father by name every morning and again before sleep. Marin answered the same each time. "He'll return when the wind is warmer." But the wind didn't change. Not yet. She sat in the shade with the elder women, weaving reed baskets. At night, she curled beside Leo, pretending not to cry when he dreamed and called for Tav in his sleep. The world felt too still without him, too hollow, like it was waiting to breathe again. Then, one afternoon, a horse came limping into camp. Riderless. It was Tav's. The saddle was loose, his flank smeared with blood. Marin didn't think. She just ran. Her hands gripped the reins, her fingers trembling as she searched the animal for signs. A broken strap, a torn blanket, no arrows, no deep wounds. But something had happened, something bad. The search party left before dusk. 5 riders, none of them her. Marin stood at the edge of the lodge grounds with Leo on her hip, staring at the thinning trees. What if he was gone? What if all this love, this child, this life had just been borrowed? Could happiness really last for someone like her? Someone given away? The thought made her knees weak. But Leo reached up and touched her cheek. And she remembered. She wasn't alone anymore. Not ever again. 2 days later, the party returned. Tav was slumped between 2 riders, barely conscious. His shoulder was wrapped in a bloodied hide. A broken spear tip stuck out from his thigh. But he was alive. Alive. Marin fell to her knees and wept. She didn't care that half the camp saw her. She didn't care that her tears soaked the dirt. She just needed him back. And the moment he opened one eye and rasped, "You waited." She knew she had never loved anything more. Recovery was slow. He couldn't walk for a while, could barely feed himself. But she cared for him the way he once had for her, wiping sweat, chewing roots, holding his hand when the pain made him grit his teeth so hard it cracked. She whispered to him in English and Apache both, sometimes nonsense, sometimes songs. Once, she pressed her forehead to his and said, "You gave me a life. I will keep it alive." When he could sit upright again, he told her the story. A cougar. It sprang from the ridge. He killed it, but not before it nearly tore through his side. He crawled for half a day before another scout heard his whistle. "I thought I might die," he said, eyes locked on hers. "And all I wanted was to see your face once more." She kissed his knuckles. "I would have walked into the mountain to find you," she said. He smiled. "You would have found me." That winter, snow came late, but it came, thick and soft, like forgiveness. Leo learned to make prints in it with his hands. Tav carved a flute. Marin baked something sweet with boiled nuts and bark syrup. It wasn't much, but they shared it, just the three of them beside the fire. When the wind rose and the others went inside, Marin and Tav stayed by the flames, Leo asleep in a bundle at their feet. And for the first time in her life, Marin said it out loud. "I love you." Tav didn't look surprised. "I know." Then he added, "But hearing it, it's like feeling the sun again." She laughed, quietly, then reached for his hand. The thaw came early that year. The creeks ran full. The wind carried warmth instead of teeth. And for the first time in a long time, Marin felt like life wasn't just survival. It was something gentler, something earned. She stood at the edge of the camp one morning, her son tugging at her hand, his hair growing wild like Tav's. Behind her, she could hear Tav's steady step. No limp now, no cane, just the soft crunch of dry needles beneath his feet. When he reached her side, he didn't say anything at first. He just took her hand, not like a man claiming, but like a man thanking. "I dreamed last night," he said, watching the birds dive toward the thawing stream. "You were in it." "Oh, you were laughing." She smiled faintly. "I don't laugh much." "You did in the dream." He hesitated, then added, "We had another child." Her breath caught, not from fear, from the idea of it. Another life, another tiny being with Tav's eyes and maybe her nose? "Was it a boy?" she asked softly. "No." He turned to her. "It was a girl, and she looked just like her mother." Marin looked down, uncertain, but he gently touched her chin and tilted her face toward his. "She was beautiful," he said. "You are beautiful." The words hit her like spring rain. Sudden, soft, needed. She blinked hard, but didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, she whispered, "No one's ever said that before." "I know." He brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "That's why I'll say it every day." Weeks passed. One night, the council fire burned brighter than usual. The drums were quiet, but the elders spoke with weight in their voices. Tav had been asked to speak for his family, to formally introduce Marin before the tribe as his chosen woman. It was a tradition, one not lightly given to outsiders, and Marin felt the pressure of every eye in the circle. Some of the women who once pitted her now sat stiff-backed, watching with something like respect, and maybe curiosity. How had this strange girl, too pale, too thin, once dropped at their border like an unwanted lamb, come to belong? Tav stood beside her. He spoke slowly, clearly. He didn't speak of her beauty, though many would have now. He didn't speak of her work or her quiet strength. He said only this: "When I was lost, she gave me a place to rest. When I had no child, she gave me a son. When I forgot how to hope, she reminded me with her hands. I do not keep her because she was given. I choose her because she stayed, and because she loved me when I was broken." Silence. Then the chief stood, then others. And one by one they offered their nods, the kind that mattered more than words. Marin did not speak. She didn't need to. Her place had already been spoken for. That night, Tav took her to the high bluff. The sky stretched wide, cold and endless, stars like scattered grain. He sat behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and rested his chin on her shoulder. "I know what they called you," he said. "What?" "Back then. Before me." She didn't answer. "Ugly. Unwanted. Too odd to keep." He pulled her closer. "But now." She waited. "You are the woman they look toward when they speak of strength." She leaned into him, and for the first time she believed it might be true. Years passed. Leo grew tall, and kind, and clever in both tongues. They did have a daughter born in the spring 2 years later. Tav named her Sali, after the first blooming blossom that appeared outside their lodge every April. She had Marin's eyes, and Tav's laugh, and neither of them ever called her ugly. Because in this life, the one Marin never thought she'd have, there was no room for that word anymore. Only love, only names chosen with care, only people who stayed. And every now and then, when someone new came through the tribe and asked the quiet woman with the strong back and gentle voice where she came from, she would smile and say, "I was once given away, but that's not where the story ends."